Womanjika. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to use a word from the language of the Kulin Nation. Womanjika, as I said, to this session, Designing for the Stage, a forum made possible with the generous support of our sponsor, the Hugh Williamson Foundation. Today we're going to be exploring behind the scenes of stagecraft, and it's fantastic to see so many people here for a topic that sometimes gets overlooked in favour of the people moving around on stage, but they move in a space that is designed and created to highlight them and other aspects of the work. So we're going to be exploring the rules, the rewards, the challenges of designing for live performance in our conversation today. Now, it's going to be a relaxed and fairly gentle day, but a couple of housekeeping notes, please. To begin with, if you have any kind of mobile device, tablet, machine that goes ping, could you please switch it to silent? Secondly, we are going to be filming today, so don't panic about your face appearing on camera if you don't want it to. The cameras are locked off and are focused on the stage, but we will be recording your questions with roaming microphones. So if at any point in proceedings you have questions for the panellists, please ensure that you wait until a microphone is brought to you so that we can use that and record your erudite questions to the panel. There is an official hashtag to use today, should you be on Twitter at any time. Hashtag Designing for Stage, if you'd like to respond to the event in any way. And you can, of course, keep in touch with the Performing Arts Collection at PAC_Art Centre, as you can see on the screen. So please use the hashtag, and if you're going to have direct questions, perhaps for the Performing Arts Collection that can't be answered, then use the at them and ask them a question or two. Before we go any further, my name is Richard Watts. I'm from 3RRR and Arts Hub. As well as emceeing the entire day, I'll also be hosting the first and facilitating the first panel. But before we go any further, I would like to welcome to the stage the CEO of Centre Melbourne, Claire Spencer.
Thank you, Richard. Wow, what a treat to have Richard Watts emceeing the day. It's great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Arts Centre. My name's Claire Spencer, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Arts Centre, which is a pretty good job, I have to say. Before we get going, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on whom we meet, the people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to elders past and present. This place, this land where we are today, has been a meeting place of centuries. And we take that custodianship of that land, and to bring you all here together today to talk about the art and performance and the stage is a pretty extraordinary thing. So sincere welcome. I would also like to particularly thank the Hugh Williamson Foundation. Hugh Williamson was a banker, but he was a kind of banker that we all love because he was the founding treasurer of the Arts Precinct when it was first created. And he was a great philanthropist, and his philanthropy continues today through the work of his foundation. And it's through their support that we've been able to bring you all together here today. The chair of the Hugh Williamson Foundation is a fantastic man called Martin Carlson, and you're going to hear from Martin in a moment. Now, Martin is a legendary arts administrator. He was in the founding management team of the Arts Centre when it was being built and when it first opened back in the 1980s. And since I've been here in Melbourne, Martin has been generous with his advice and giving me some explanations about the history of the Arts Centre, and particularly of John Truscott, who was the designer who created the extraordinary interiors of both the theatres building here, the theatres, and also of Hamer Hall. Martin still maintains a strong interest in what we do and how we engage with each new generation as they come to know us and to love what we do. And today we've gathered what we're going to refer to as a galaxy of great Australian theatre designers. Welcome to all the people who will be talking on our panels today. And to the students with us today, it's great to have you here and to engage with you in this creative discussion. At Arts Centre Melbourne, we live and breathe our purpose, which is to bring people together for remarkable experiences. And I think today's event does that so well. Since the late 1970s, when John Truscott first sparked the idea of a performing arts collection, we've been able to build a remarkable story linking generations of artists, be they performers, technicians, designers, musicians, many others. And our collection now features more than 600,000 items, squirreled away in various storage units around Melbourne, desperately in need of a gallery home. Exhibitions such as stage presence allow us to create opportunities to engage with our visitors through the items that we have on show, both around the theatres building in Hamer Hall and in Gallery 1 downstairs, providing insights into the creative spirit that's inspired many great productions, both on our stages and on stages beyond Arts Centre Melbourne's immediate footprint. Through the collections, the stories have travelled nationally and some internationally to great acclaim. Today's forum allows us to take stage presence in a different direction, to share the collection's treasures in a way that celebrates creative talent and shares knowledge through education. We're committed to education here at Arts Centre Melbourne. We believe that arts and education should go hand in hand. Last week in this room, we had 300 delegates who were here for an education summit to talk about the future of education in Australia. And it was with a sense of real pride in the team here at Arts Centre Melbourne that I was able to showcase our credentials and our connection to their event through our own education programs. We have over 450,000 students come through here annually, which, just to give you a sense of numbers, it would fill this room over 150 times. It's a lot of school children, involving over 400 Victorian schools. And from that, I think it's clear that we take education and learning seriously. And last month, stage presence also prompted a new learning opportunity as we tapped the creative mind of students to launch the inaugural Design Academy exhibition. Students from Albert Park Secondary College attended a performance of La Boheme in preparation for the Academy, and over the ensuing weeks unpacked the opera through intense workshops to build an interesting and creative 21st century interpretation of the design for La Boheme through sound, lighting, and costumes. And maybe that experience has sparked a future career path for one of those students. We certainly hope so. Today, there is an astounding amount of experience and talent in the room, and this includes a considerable pool of interest from you, the students who are the creative talent of the new generation. I hope today will perhaps spark something within you that in a few years' time, you'll be sitting here, you'll be one of our panellists, sharing the knowledge with the next generation of creative industries workers. So please have a great day, enjoy the creative environment that you're in. Feel free to wander around the theatres building during the breaks. We have an extraordinary collection of Australian art, as well as the stage design, stage presence exhibition downstairs. Take time to connect with each other. I hope you make some new friends. And also, try and take time just to say hello to Martin, who's going to join us now on the stage. He is a great storyteller and has some terrific tales of everything that's happened here at Arts Centre Melbourne since it opened. So it's now my real pleasure to welcome Martin Carlson to address you. Thank you.
I think I should go home, it's all been said. What is significant about today, as I see it from my own experiences here, is that in the design of the Arts Centre, which was a tortuous process, the whole concept of an arts centre was bubbling away created by people who had operations happening across the river and never stopped complaining about the inadequacy of their facilities. It sounds like a familiar phrase to me. But anyway, the then Premier of the State, Henry Bolte, gave in to some pressures, bearing in mind at those stages there were no such things as ministers for the arts. things of a cultural nature which belonged to the state were looked after by the secretary to the government, and he could have his own mind about what you might or may not do. The pressure was being imposed on the government because the state companies, so-called, that is, organisations who were in receipt of some money or assistance to carry on with their works, had made sufficient of a noise that the gallery got first cab off the rank, and that wasn't surprising because it was a gallery of great stature with an amazing collection that had emerged over the years. And this bit of land along here from just past Hamer Hall to where the end of the gallery is had fortuitously been reserved some 60 years before that this should be for cultural purposes. It wouldn't happen in today's world. It'd be all having shops on it and developers' buildings and all sorts of other things. Nevertheless, the decision was made to proceed, and what was established was a body which had a wonderful name, the National Gallery and Cultural Centre Building of Victoria. And that was what surrounded what happened when the gallery emerged after a tortuous time. Roy Grounds went off with other people to look at galleries around the world, and they came back with what we have, despite some variations that have made since then. The gallery was finished. Mr. Bolte got a bit scared because the country people were saying enough money for the city for a while. It's not unusual for that to happen to those sorts of governments, so the project came to a halt. But then it was reopened again, and the architect designed, Sir Roy Grounds, went out to produce what he thought Melbourne needed, what he'd been told Melbourne needed, and what the government sort of thought of told him they should get. We are sitting above what was a great big hole. The site of which the theatres is built, because of the scale of the building was envisaged, had to go below ground, most of it. So there's 7 stories of ground below us, which occupies part of this building. This hole, however, wasn't just digging a hole. It had to have into it inserted tiebacks and piles, because the whole place was full of water running off the river. The whole history of the river, as the river has changed its course over those years. So this great bathtub was built, into which we did have a bathtub, a total concrete bathtub. It sat there for a little while further decisions were made about going to the next stage. The concert hall hadn't even come up in discussions. That was another stage on. And the building then of the theatres building here took the format, well, we've got to survive for drama, we've got to survive for opera, we've got to survive for some form of other stage performances. We've got this large lump of land down here in a key spot. What is it that we can do? Now, out of it came the whole understanding that perhaps it wasn't just putting buildings together where people came to a theatre performance and went home. There was another vitality we should build around what the Arts Centre is about arts themselves, about their community, what was right for here, what wasn't. And in that process, spaces like this emerged. At one stage, Roy Grounds had 3 sets of slides going out here to make this 3 different compartments so we could have different events going on, and that went on for ages and ages, but eventually got itself solved. The project took a long time. In the 70s, in the Keating years, inflation was running at 18%. Industrial relations in this city were abominable, and at one stage we had 2 building companies working on the site. An English company, Costain, over there, and Lewis, Australian company, working here. We had to make certain that they didn't come in contact with each other during the course of the days of their varying passages, so separate accommodation had to be provided for each of those. But out of the general feeling and groundswell emerged, particularly when a decision was made that the proposed visuals of the interiors of the building were not going to be proceeded with, and that was the stage which led the Arts Centre to invite Truscott to come back from Hollywood where he was working. And Truscott was a unique man in the sense that Melbourne Central School wandered off with some drawings down to what was then the National Theatre, and still is the National Theatre in St Kilda, where the only opera company of Australia existed, took his drawings in, and the lady who was running that took a kind shot to him and said, well, we'll give you a go. She gave him a go to start to do some design work. After a time, it became apparent that he was bigger than perhaps the National Theatre was able to engage with. And she said to him, I think he should go up to the Little Theatre in South Yarra and speak to Rennie Mitchell. At the Little Theatre there, at that time, was the only permanent theatre company in Australia operating. Rennie Mitchell took him on, and for the next 9 years, he worked at the Little Theatre, designing something like 9 to 10 shows a year. An extraordinary achievement, absolutely incredible achievement. He got to a stage when he was doing so well that he was invited by a commercial entrepreneur to do the sets and designs for Camelot, which staged show in Her Majesty's Theatre. That achieved quite a lot of attention for him, and the good burghers of the Little Theatre, they thought they should do something for him, so they gave him £2,000 and a watch and said, go to London, which he did. Fortunately for him, Robert Helpman was in London, and Robert Helpman was going to produce Camelot in London. Truscott got the gig, and it was a great success there, excepting one night the Warner Brothers turned up on the stage, and the Warner Brothers said, we'd like you to come to Los Angeles with tomorrow, or virtually, and he went with them and produced and did the film of Camelot in terms of what was his skills in lighting and design and costume. At age 29, he won 2 Oscars. Not a bad performance at all for someone who'd come out of secondary college, a technical school, to get to that stage in Italy. But then the effect of Truscott was magnificent in this place, because everything that you see, he saw, he did, he knew. He was one of those people who had the capacity to see everything at once, sort of. One of the great stories of Truscott was, by the time he came, all those big concrete-covered pillars that are around the place were all over the place, and he decided, well, he'd like that all to be marble, so could we change that overnight? He suddenly realised that was not possible. So he set out to cause them to be painted so they looked like marble. He went out and found and hunted around to find an energetic young painter who thought he might like to do it. And this young man was very excited. He painted his first column that looked like was marble and got John to come and look at it. And John said, yes, but. And he said, yes, but to him 6 more times before he was satisfied with the quality of what was on that. It was the nature of the man in what he saw. So by that stage, the project had become known as the Victorian Arts Centre Building Committee. That was a bit easier. Then a bit later on, when we were nearly finished, we became the Victorian Arts Centre Trust. So the residue of Truscott, of his skill, of his capacity to give Melbourne a sense of pride, because there were many people in this city who believed that, well, the Opera House was there, we're not going to be as good as them, and all that sort of nonsense that goes on in people's minds. So a lot of work was done, and one of the most interesting contributions that I think that he made, and which Kenneth Meyer, the then chairman of the Trust, picked up with immediately, was we should make every effort that all the public spaces we have in these buildings have in them works of art by Australian artists. So you can walk through all of those spaces, and there they are. That meant, however, we had to go out and raise a lot more tin rattling to be able to buy them, but nevertheless we got them there, and the story that they tell in their own ways is an extraordinary story. Hugh Williamson, banker, as indicated, born Ballarat, 14, went off to find something to do after leaving school, studied accounting, got a job with a bank in Ballarat. Ballarat was full of banks as the residue of the gold rush days, got a job there, moved to another banker, stayed in the banking world, became the chief executive officer of the ANZ when it was formed, was the honorary treasurer of the whole of this project as the group of people that made up what was the building committee. Not a man who'd run out to go to see theatre performance too much. He was too busy playing bands with the Salvation Army, of which he was a great patron, an honorary colonel of the Salvation Army. And he, in his will, and I was fortunate enough with 3 or 4 other people to be asked by him if we'd look after his will. When he died in 1985, the estate was worth $5.2 million. Last Friday it was $43 million, and we've distributed $30 million in that time. The capacity for us to do what we do is focused on Williamson's own interpretations, and he was so serious about that on the top of his will he wrote in big letters, "Don't forget Ballarat." And Ballarat keeps telling us. But out of that came a set of grants that have been made to 350 organisations within the state of Victoria. The concentration of what we do is highlighted primarily and initially by leadership, and that also came out of his role as Chief Inspector of the ANZ Bank when he wandered the continent talking to people in management and all those sorts of issues. And beyond the leadership bit, there was certainly an interest in his part on arts, but principally on the visual arts, and that's been reflected in Ballarat in addition of 2 galleries to the site, and that was partly influenced for him by his sister, who was an artist in her own right. Apart from leadership and arts, there was certainly in health, and more recently there's been a strong thrust by us in terms of environmental issues, but particularly when you're linking arts and the environment together as you can, quite deliberately. So for us, it was very interesting to be offered to do this. It's a continuation of what some of us thought about when the concept of performing arts was raised. The interesting thing about that over there, where there is a hotel building just there on the corner, apartment block, that was occupied by Mobil Oil, and whom we talked to about perhaps supporting us as we were talking to everyone in Melbourne who would talk to us, because we needed a lot of money to fill up the gaps that were appearing with costs and things. It ended up with Mobil Oil New York providing us with $300,000 to put together the Performing Arts Museum. Extraordinary contribution at that time when you're talking about. So all of those things came together. They came together with the genesis of a Meyer and a George Fairfax and a Hugh Williamson and a John Truscott. All of those people would be delighted to see you here. Come again.
Now, the fun thing about being MC is I get to wander around. I've got a headset mic, but I promise I'm not going to plunge into the audience and run around amok asking you questions. There will be, as we said, a roving mic a little bit later on for your questions, so please do use that. So we have a number of panels today talking about a number of different aspects of stage design. To begin with, we're going to talk about adaptation. Productions that adapt stories from book to stage or film to stage can present particular challenges for designers. How do they make the leap from one art form to another? Can the design compete with the audience's own imagination and memories? And can productions maintain their essence while being adapted to suit different performance venues, from a small theatre in Hobart to a large theatre in Bendigo or Sydney? So please welcome to the stage our first 3 panellists to talk about adaptation. Hugh Colman, one of Australia's preeminent theatre, dance and opera designers. Richard Roberts, a freelance theatre designer and teacher. And Brian Thomson, one of Australia's most successful set designers with a career spanning 5 decades. Please make them welcome. Brian, it's rather apt that you're sitting next to me because I'm going to talk to you first. So in the process of adaptation, obviously there are many things to consider, but I'm interested in your personal process of adaptation, because when you began designing for the stage and then later for film, you weren't initially interested in theatre as an art form, were you?
No, not at all. First of all, I just want to say that it was wonderful to hear the story about John Truscott and the building of the way this building happened. That's miraculous, really, isn't it? And we're very lucky. I was studying architecture. This was back in the 60s when I fell in love with pop art, and I left architecture and decided I'd be a pop artist. The only thing was that I didn't really have any talent. I couldn't really paint, and I couldn't really draw or sculpt. I could make models. I was quite nice, could make little tiny models. And I met Jim Sharman, the stage director, in a hamburger bar in Sydney. And he'd heard about me because I'd done a few things, a few kind of happening things, and had gotten a little bit of a reputation in the city. I mean, not much, but Jim had heard about this and said, "Oh, you should work in theatre." And I said, "Well, why? Why would I want to do that?" And so we kind of left it at that. And then a bit later on, he contacted me and he said Harry Miller, the great entrepreneur, Harry M. Miller, was going to want to do a production of Tommy, the rock opera. And I had got the record of Tommy and loved it so much, and so I thought, oh well, maybe I'll have a go at that. And I then had to work out how I'd go about this. So I made a series of kind of little model installations, which ended up being the idea for the kind of the settings for it. And finally, that show never happened. So I thought, oh well, that's that. I won't be doing that anymore. So I went back to being what I thought would be a pop artist. And Jim came back, and he was going to run one of the theatres in Sydney, and was going to do a Shakespeare and wanted me to do that. So I mean, the idea of doing theatre and more doing Shakespeare was so far away. So I did do it, and then Harry Miller came back to me and asked me if I'd redesign Hair, which Jim had done in Sydney, for Melbourne. And so I had the chance. I suddenly realised that the stage could be a canvas for all of these kind of pop art ideas that I had and was very keen to let the world see in some other context. So what I've done for 50 years is just kind of change context of things, move things along. I mean, there's some of the things that I've done there. The idea of adapting from a record to say a stage show also occurred when we did Jesus Christ Superstar, which was really an album that was done by Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber. And Harry asked us to do that, so we did a sort of a concert version of that. Then we did a production which was floating by there before, which had a big dodecahedron. That's a big three-dimensional kind of shape in it. And this again, this was kind of me adapting my architectural ideas onto the stage. So I thought, oh, that's good. I can do that as well. So that's really what I've been doing for my whole career.
Now, Hugh, I wanted to speak to you about adaptation as well, and in particular the idea of adapting an existing idea or remounting a show in some way, because over 5 decades you've worked on more than 200 productions for Opera Australia, the Australian Ballet, Victorian Opera, MTC and so forth. And so when you're designing a work such as Swan Lake, for example, which you did for the Australian Ballet in 2012, talk to us about the challenge of trying to honour an existing work while reinterpreting it for a contemporary audience.
The thing with the Swan Lake that I was asked to do was that I had a very specific brief from David McAllister, who's the artistic director of the Australian Ballet. They have already in their repertoire a wonderful production of Graham Murphy's and Christian Fredrickson's, which is a very different take from the traditional version of Swan Lake. But David thought that a company on the scale of the Australian Ballet should also have something approaching a traditional version of it. And so that was my brief, was that it needed to be within those boundaries. And then, of course, the most important part of the equation is the choreographer, and Stephen Baines, who's one of their resident choreographers, was given the commission, and Stephen and I had never worked together before, so we needed to meet and see if there were ideas that we had in common to share. One of the things that I set myself resolutely to do was not to look at any other productions of Swan Lake. Of course, I'd already seen a number over the years, but I wanted to try to come to it fresh. And I suppose the thing that was exciting about it for me was to meet the music and to find whether Stephen and I could work towards a world that was both traditional and yet not just a version of something that everybody had seen before. And that was, in essence, the beginning of a 3-year project for me. It's the longest time I've ever had to work on a production. A company like the Australian Ballet needs to work well in advance because of the scale of their repertoire. And so that was a luxury for me, to be able to immerse myself in the music, to have regular meetings with Stephen and David as we moved towards a concept of the ballet that would place it in a world where the story would make some kind of sense, and the only thing that we really wanted to do was make sure that it didn't have the traditional didn't mean old-fashioned in that sense. So we wanted to make it a production that still had an immediacy for a contemporary audience. It's not museum theatre. And we agreed after, and this was a great luxury. I think all designers would say that 3 years is a very long lead-up time on a production. I'd never had anything like that before. But it did give us room to move and to come to the world that we wanted to make for the production. Stephen's choreography was going to be a combination of his own original choreography, and he and David had agreed to keep certain sections of the traditional choreography. So those were the parameters that we had to work in, and our decision was to set it round about the time that it was written, so late 19th century, in a world, in a real world in a sense, so that we didn't want the fantasy element of Swan Lake to override everything else. And so that was the journey for this one. But that's a very particular journey. A lot of other journeys have been much briefer than that, I must say. Lead-up time, quite often you're thrown in with maybe a couple of weeks into a production. And one of the adaptations that I worked on 2002 was an adaptation of a children's story, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which a lot of you may know as a book. And this had already moved a certain way down the track before I was brought on board. And the basis of it was that it was to be a puppet, essentially a puppet and performer show, puppets, acrobats and actors. So that was a given, and the puppets were already a long way along the track in terms of design, which is another thing that designers often have to deal with, is the fact that if you're not designing the entire production, which I had that luxury with Swan Lake, but in this production I was doing sets and costumes for the humans. The puppets were entirely separate, but everything had to kind of coordinate. And then on top of that, it had to accommodate what the acrobats needed to do, and the puppeteers, most importantly. So every production has its own different challenges, and I suppose in terms of adaptation, the big one there is the level of expectation that might be there from people who knew and loved the books. All you can do is bring yourself to that. You know, that's the same with any audience. We can't double guess what you're going to like or not like about it. So there are just a couple of examples of where adaptation can take you.
Now, Richard, since you started your first professional engagement with State Theatre Company of South Australia in '77, you've worked with all the major performing arts companies in Australia. You've also taught, and given that you've worked with so many companies, you've obviously also then worked with productions that have toured. And let's talk about the process of adapting a design for touring, particularly in light of the fact that you might be playing somewhere like Frankston Performing Arts Centre, which has a 14-metre wide stage. But then you might also be moving down to Hobart's Theatre Royal, where the stage is only 7.8 metres across. So how do you adapt a touring work for those differing conditions?
Okay. Actually, when Megan asked me to be part of this and the topic was adaptation, I did have to think quite a long time about how I might squeeze that into my own experience. And in fact, there's some images up here of two shows that I chose specifically because they had their beginnings in one type of venue and then, for various reasons, found their way into a profoundly different venue for the next iteration of them. I just wanted to say before I spoke a little more about that, about the idea of adaptation. In a kind of sense, every time you do a show, it's a new adaptation, isn't it? Because you're adapting to a different set of resources, like you've either got quite a lot of money or usually not enough, a lot of different types of, resources of who's going to make it for you, what is the space like that you're going to work in. So, it's a bit like, when someone says, when you might say, oh, I'm going off to see a production of Hamlet in a couple of days' time, and they say, but haven't you seen that before? And you say, well, I've seen it a few times, but I've never seen this one, because every time is a new adaptation in a sense. I picked two shows, and oddly enough, they're both directed by the same person, Wesley Enoch, and they, as it turns out, were co-productions between Melbourne Theatre Company and Belvoir Street, and that was a bit of a coincidence, really. But I picked them because they, in one instance, the first one was The Sapphires, was an adaptation. Well, it was a brand new script actually, a musical about 4 women travelling to Vietnam and singing during the Vietnam War. It turned into a movie, but most people probably have seen. And that was in 2004, and it was commissioned by the Melbourne Theatre Company, and we started work on it. I'd actually just come off a rather bruising experience doing the very first production of Dirty Dancing, which I don't have any images for very good reasons. And in fact, that had kind of been such a tough experience that I'd seriously thought about giving the whole bloody thing away. And I'd already committed to The Sapphires, and thank God, because in fact it was a wonderfully restorative experience with this great friend of mine, Wesley Enoch, and it was a great piece. And anyway, it started life at Melbourne Theatre Company in the Playhouse. We designed a 12-metre revolve. We had curtains that swung in and out with Kerry Saxby's wonderful kind of Heath Robinson type automation. So we had flying and all of that sort of stuff, and we're well into it. And I think it was about the third week of rehearsals, the fourth week. So, we've plotted it all, and it's all moving and all of this sort of stuff. And then Neil Armfield comes down, damn it, and walks into the rehearsal room, sees the run in the rehearsal room, and says to Wesley, "Oh, we're having that for Belvoir Street." A 12-metre revolve in Belvoir Street's not a good look. So, that production had to go from really a big, 12-metre wide proscenium with everything flying, the Playhouse, into the beautiful but intimate space of Belvoir Street. And what you have to do in a circumstance like that is really try to kind of find what is the essence of the design. What are the key things in this design that are transferable, and everything around it will shift and change. And in our instance with that production, it was a World War II Jeep, a 70s Jeep that was the sort of central piece in the design. The second production was The Man from Muckanuppin, which was, 4 or 5 years later. And that was the opposite. That was, and it wasn't quite sprung on us like Neil did with the first one. It was always planned that it would go from Belvoir Street to the Sumner here. It was one of the first shows on the Sumner. And so it was done in reverse in a way. We began in the intimate environment of Belvoir Street, where the audience are effectively in the same room as the actors, and then we moved to the Sumner, where the elements that we had spread onto the stage at the at Belvoir, we literally transferred them to the Sumner. Basically, that meant we went from 2 tonnes of white sand in Belvoir Street to 20 tonnes of sand in Sumner. but apart from that, it was pretty much the same show.
Now, when I think of adaptation, I guess one of the things, one of the recent productions I saw that sprang to mind when I was thinking about this topic was STC's The Secret River, designed by Stephen Curtis. Now, for that, as he writes about in a recent platform paper, he took his visual cues from a passage in Kate Grenville's novel which describes the character Thornhill, used to small prison cells and the English landscape. Impacted by the environs of the Hawkesbury River. He describes it as a void into which his very being expanded without finding a boundary, all in the merciless light that blasted down, and that Australian light is obviously very impactful. So on stage, that design translated into a light-filled cathedral-like space that quite revelled in its theatricality. Now, what I wanted to ask the three of you about, and Hugh, you've already spoken about taking cues from music, in designing for an adaptation from a book or a film, for example, how important is it to look for those sorts of visual cues in the writing, in the original source material, whether that source material is literary or musical? Or are your designs more influenced by the director's vision for the work? So that's a question for the three of you.
Well, I did Priscilla, which was a bit different to The Big Secret River, but it was taken from a film to a stage musical. And the first thing I asked the producer was, do we have to have a bus? Because I was perfectly happy to do the show I love the idea of doing it in a bar, just kind of doing it in a drag bar and having the whole story told like a drag show, which, yeah, that's all very well, but no, he wanted a bus. So, yeah, we have to have a bus. And the thing about the bus is that it has to change colour, has to get painted, had to have an interior and an exterior, had to have the famous scene on the top with the shoe and the fabric. So they were all fairly daunting things to do, but I just kind of I just held to the kind of ideas of what we do in theatre. Like, really, if we want to change stuff in theatre, the simplest way is doing it by lighting. So what we did with the bus, in order for it to change colour, was we studied the whole thing in LEDs. The production, which is developed over the last decade, now has the bus fully covered in LEDs, and the bus kind of has a character, so that when they sing the song "Girls Just Want to Have Fun," the bus has a bubble bath. So you see a bubble bath going around and a little duck and things like that. So it became wonderful fun to actually adapt this thing that had been so crucial in the movie. And I think there's an image that was kind of scrolling past, actually, of the way we solved the shoe on top of the bus with the fabric. So that was, they're great I think what it is, it's a wonderful challenge. And another just brief story is when I did the Rocky Horror Show and we made that into a film. And the great thing about that is that we had to invent a world that had never existed before, because we had to create a world where a transvestite from a planet called transsexual would live. What kind of world would that be? And it just became a wonderful, fun thing to do. And I remember we were shooting a scene, and the executives from Fox Studios came over, and their jaws kind of hit the floor. But because you couldn't say, oh no, I don't think that's how these people would live. But I've done other films where the producer will come in and say, oh, I don't think their bedroom would be like that. So the wonderful thing about doing something like Rocky, so if you pick the right kind of things, the wonderful thing about doing that movie is that we created an entire world. And I base it mainly on kind of art. We've got all sorts of references. The Mona Lisa's in it. The creation of Adam is on the bottom of the swimming pool. So it was so much fun taking art pieces and put them into a different kind of context.
Hugh?
A very different show indeed. I was asked to design Snugglepot and Cuddlepie, another children's book, for the Australian Ballet quite a long time ago, which was a book I loved as a kid, absolutely loved. And it was going to be new music and completely new choreography, so kind of an open slather in a way, and yet not, because what I had to do, I knew I absolutely had to do, was acknowledge and honour May Gibbs, because that's so much the experience of the book, is those drawings. So number one, what do you do with those little tiny chubby babies who are going to be dancers from the Australian Ballet? You just have to accept the fact that they're going to be bigger and not have bare bottoms. So, we tried to kind of keep the scale difference by enlarging all the scenery. So, humans looked smaller within that, and of course, the animal world that we brought into it too was scaled up so that in your mind's eye they could be smaller. But I don't think anybody ever thought they were really tiny little chubby babies. But so the thing that I discovered about May Gibbs was what a fantastic observer she was. They're not fantasy drawings. They're her drawings of animals and the bush are remarkably sharp observations of the real world. So I felt I could move into that a little bit and expand her love of nature, enlarge it, if you will, a little bit. But I also wanted to keep that sort of very graphic sense of her drawing style in it. So that was a choice, and a choice that I was very happy to make. But it's quite difficult, in a sense, then to know how much is just literally May and how much is what you bring to it. And without actually copying, I did embrace her style as much as I could in the scenic elements, and I kept the scenic elements very kind of two-dimensional in a way. Again, I guess a response to the illustrations and maybe a response to the budget, because we didn't have an endless budget. But I thought it might overwhelm it if the scenery, for example, we had a woodland scene where there's a branch going across the stage. There was talk at one stage of that being fully dimensional and the dancers being able to climb on it and so forth, but that didn't finally interest the choreographer, Petal Miller, very much, and so we moved back to a much more stylised background. But within the creation of the animal world, and I think there's an image there of Mrs. Cockatoo, who was one of the extras. So I kind of designed a lot of extras that didn't get built into the ballet at the end. They did little walk-ons and things, but it was fantastic fun thinking, so, okay, how do I turn this into a dance costume? Biggest challenge of all, I guess, Mrs. Snake. Snake's legs, that sort of thing. What do we do? How do we... I don't have a Mrs. Snake. There's Mrs. Cockatoo, and there are the boys, as you can see, slightly more grown up, but still embracing the gumnut motive. So that was a very particular kind of world where there was a pre-existing set of images that a lot of people would be bringing to the ballet from their childhood memories. So that had to be honoured, but it also had to accommodate the needs of the choreography and Richard Mills' very original score for it.
Yeah, I was thinking that, adaptation, I was thinking about the Kate Granville quote that you were talking about before, and that to take a novel, and it's a classic thing, isn't it, when you go and see a movie of a book that you absolutely love, it's kind of rare that it actually lives up to the same what you have in your own head. And I've often thought that the theatre has the ability to do that in a way that film doesn't. That, theatre, we all accept when we go into a theatre, we know that it's we're here and you're there and we're all in the same room and it's now, and we're kind of conjuring up that world. Whereas in a film, you can let yourself go and actually believe that it is in there. And in that sense that, if you choose the right object or the right couple of objects or the right things to clothe the person in, that the audience themselves with their own imaginations can fill in the details. And in some ways that will be much more powerful, I think. And I certainly found that with The Secret River. I mean, that completely lived up to my own imagination when I read that book, and I absolutely adored that stage adaptation. And I'm not absolutely... In fact, and, there was the TV series, which had a different dimension to it, but for me, the stage one had so much more power. For that reason, I think.
Now, while I was doing some research for this panel, I found a great quote from the British designer Bob Crowley, who said, designing for the stage, quote, "It's such a very strange job. You often only get noticed when people think you're drawing attention to yourself." How much does that resonate with the three of you?
Oh, well, I've certainly never done anything that draws attention. Well, I think it's crucial that if visually you can do something that can help place where you are. For instance, if scrolling through here is the image of La Traviata on the harbour. I mean, that's a tricky thing to do, doing a opera on the harbour, but it just occurred to me that I really wanted people to go down to the edge of Sydney Harbour and find something unexpected, and I think to find a huge chandelier hanging in the middle of Sydney Harbour, that's unexpected, and I think that's part of the process, and I think that sometimes it's better to be not. For instance, in the production of Priscilla that I did, that had costumes by Tim Chappell and Lizzie Gardner, I mean, I had to really pull back on that to let those costumes have full majesty, because I think they are some of the greatest stage costumes ever. I mean, I sit in the theatre and look at some of those things and think, where did that come from? How did that happen? And I'm so glad that what I've done is actually really just highlighting that. And they are moments, like the moments where in the outback they're practicing in those so-called Gumby outfits. That is a sensational moment. And in the theatre, when you've got like a whole row of them, it is just extraordinary.
Yes. Completely frozen. I had a thought that I was completely. Just give me the question again.
Okay. The question was, just responding to the comment by designer Bob Crowley about it being a strange job. You often only get noticed when people think you're drawing attention to yourself.
Yeah, no, I did have a thought about this. That it's years ago now, actually, that I took some students. It's in Perth when I was teaching over there, and I took some students to a cheek by jowl production of Measure for Measure at the Octagon Theatre in Perth, and they'd come out to Perth to actually put this to rehearse it, and it was having its first outing in Perth, and it was going off on a world tour, and they're an amazing company. And I took these students to it, and we walked into the theatre, and the stage was pretty much bare. There was, it was stage black. I think there was a strip of red cloth hanging sort of midway up the stage. One of the back doors out into the dressing rooms was wide open with a great shaft of light coming through it, and there was a black table and a few black chairs. That's it, And the play began, and at interval, I mean, it was a fabulous production. It was completely compelling. And at interval, I came out with the students and we were chatting about it, and they were all obviously completely engaged with it. They loved it. And I said, what do you think of the design? And they looked at me like, well, that's the shame really, isn't it? Because there wasn't any design. And I said, well, look, no, actually that's the most sophisticated design of all, because really what real design is, I think, at the heart of it is ideas rather than things, And it was a great opportunity to show students that, I mean, I think, oh, look, I'm into things, let me tell you. I love things. But, I mean, I think they need to be driven, as I think Brian's just said, they need to be driven by ideas behind them. Why do you put something on the stage?
Hugh?
Look, it depends what you're asked to do, really, sometimes. I completely understand Richard's response to that moment and that the thing that so often people have said, oh, but there wasn't really a design, which means that maybe you had an expectation of what there was going to be. There was going to be scenery, or there were going to be costumes and lighting in your face. If that's not what this production is about, then those things shouldn't be there, because they'll become distractions. If it's called for, if you're doing a Sleeping Beauty, don't be too backward in coming forward, because the expectation is for some level of grandeur, let's say. There was an Italian film designer who wrote something that inspired me recently. He said, if you've got an idea, don't serve it half-baked. And I take that very, very much to heart, because it's possibly my tendency is to sort of, go, oh, well, it's not about me, it's about da-da-da. But you think, now, come on, if, as Richard said, you've got an idea, don't let it go unseen. And people will make up their own minds about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. But if you put it in there and nobody noticed it, what are you doing? Do you know what I mean? So, and the idea is never simply yours. It's because theatre is so completely about a kind of community of people who make things. Your idea will have had to be bounced off several other people before it lands. But own it, I suppose, is the thing there.
Yeah, I know Bob, and Aladdin has just opened, and if you read the reviews, they're all about the design, so he doesn't seem to have lived up to his own statement. And good on him.
Now, I'm going to throw it to the floor for questions in just a moment, but before we do, a final question for the three of you. Given that you've all had significant and established careers, and that we have a room full of students here, I'm just wondering if anybody has ever given you a piece of advice that you wished you'd been told at the very start of your careers as designers to help you kind of dodge a pothole in the road or some kind of professional challenge.
Well, Patrick White once said to me that what I needed to do was to always trust my intuition. And I've kind of tried to follow that, which I was very thankful for that piece of advice.
I'm not sure that it's something that anyone's given me as advice particularly, but I do think that as a designer, now 60, I don't think you stop learning how to be a designer. I think it's just a process of, in my instance, stealing other people's ideas and making them into my style. I actually wanted, this makes me think of something that, and Brian doesn't know this, but when you figure out or you learn your own particular way of designing, for me it's a process of picking up on the way other people do things and going, oh, that's a good bit and I'll do that and so on. And I had a very powerful moment a long time ago now, in 1980, when I was in South Australia and the production manager at the South Australian Theatre Company said, hey, Richard, come over and have a look at this. There's a model over in the boardroom at the Adelaide Festival Centre. You might be interested, because he knew I was into the models. And it was Death in Venice that had been newly delivered, that was going to be for that festival, I think. It must have been in the late 70s, actually, 79 or something. And I remember walking into that boardroom and seeing this amazing model. I mean, it was incredibly beautiful. It was the level of craftsmanship in the model, and not just the craftsmanship of the model, but the content of the model, was so amazing. And in that moment, it was like a kind of fabulous class for me. Suddenly the penny dropped and I went, oh, I know, okay, so this is the standard that we need to aspire to. It was really like that, Brian. And I mean, I think for me, all the way through my career, right, even now, that you go and see something and you go, oh, that's a great way to do something. That's that's just building on what you're already doing.
So constantly learning.
Definitely, yeah.
I don't think I couldn't quote somebody saying something, but certainly by observation of working with some very remarkable people. I had the great privilege of working with Christian Fredrickson as a design assistant at the Melbourne Theatre Company. In my very early years, there wasn't a design school in Australia to go to, and if you lucked in, you got an apprenticeship, which is what I got, with one of the very finest designers that this country, or New Zealand, produced him, but I think Australia's claimed him. And what I observed in Christian's work was that no design was put down that didn't have an idea behind it and a meaning, even if it was a meaning that that was almost private, if you know what I mean. So, and I absolutely take Brian's point about your intuition. It's maybe taking your intuition to the next level, which is cross-examining it and sort of understanding why you're driven to put that colour down or whatever it is, so that for you at least for me, each design and each aspect of design means something, that I think then design kind of will be interconnected, and people will pick up on it or not, but it will be there to be picked up on, you know. So that was through observation. And can I just, I would love to honour, he wasn't a mentor, he never knew that he was a mentor, but he was one of my design heroes, Desmond Healy, who died quite recently and who designed the Australian Ballet's very beautiful productions of Jürgen and The Merry Widow, which it's still just staggering along after all these years. Desmond was of the school of design that he could do everything, and did paint a lot of his sets. He could do the millinery, he could cut costumes. He had been trained in a way that I don't even know exists anymore, because very few theatre companies will put those demands on a designer. I don't go anywhere now where I have to do any of that. But I had a little bit of it at the Melbourne Theatre Company. I painted my own sets or other people's sets and did what you could. And then, mercifully, people who came along who were much better, because that was their job, they'd chosen to do that, would do it. And so your work is lifted up by their talent. But the great thing about at least knowing a bit of it is that you know how to have the conversations with them, so that I loved that story about that Martin told about John Truscott and the marble column. I'd love to have heard those conversations, but I'm sure John had a very specific image in his mind of how he wanted that to be. But if you can paint a little bit yourself, then you can have the meaningful conversation with the painter, rather than just go, I want it to look more like marble, and walk away. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you want to be a designer, make it your responsibility to know as much about how things are made, even if you're not going to be making it yourself. We've got some designers later in the panel who can do some of these things. Not in this panel, the next one, I think. So, yeah, for what it's worth.
But we can all Google.
We can all Google, yes.
So let's throw to some questions from the floor. Yes, down the front. Oh, but actually, we've just got the roaming mic coming your way. So just think of this as, I don't know, a theatrical opera in which the microphone does need to come to you before you speak.
Actually, my question is very relevant to what you were just talking about, because I noticed that you were mentioning about the cockatoo woman.
Yes.
I'm new to set design, and I'm learning that there are jobs for me to do and jobs for other people to do. And I have come in doing a lot of stuff and going that, and then being told, oh, you didn't have to do all that. So I've kind of learnt that there are different roles, and I was curious to see, when you do a set, are you, and all three of you really, is it different every time? Do you do some costume? Do you do some of the scenic? Do you do some of the props? Or is it always just the set?
Oh, absolutely not. I love to greedily do everything if I can, if that's the job that's offered to me, because in a way it's quite hard not to think of the costumes when you're thinking about the set. But on the other hand, collaborations with other designers have also been a very big part of my life. So I think it's important to be able to understand, even if you're not doing it, so that you can have those meaningful conversations. So, yeah, you can't know too much, even if you don't have to do it. Know about it, you know. So that's like, I couldn't cut a costume if my life depended on it, but I could have the conversation with the cutter. You can do enough research and observation to put yourself in that, because that's power. You know, if you have to say, look, I don't know how it's done, make me a miracle. Well, yeah, you know, lots of luck.
I did some costume designs before we went to London to do Superstar, and I always found it very difficult to work with actors, because they always had such an opinion about, you know. I have such admiration for costume designers. But I worked with Maria Bjornsson, who you might know, who did Phantom, doing a show with her. And it made me think, you know, I just haven't got that. I haven't got that skill, I haven't got that ability. And then I worked with Sue Blaine, who did the Rocky Horror Show and many other wonderful things. And as I watch these people work, I'm just in awe of their ability to, you know, make Tim Curry look like that in Rocky Horror. I could never do that. I'd just get too cranky and say, well, listen, Tim, you just go. Or, look, I don't believe the shoes make the character. You know what I mean? And I really admire all of you guys who do the costumes because, boy, oh boy, it's a hard job.
Yes, I mean, I do both. In fact, or sometimes, just do the set. I mean, I've just come from a production in Perth of Caucasian Chalk Circle, which had, there was a costume designer from Beijing, there was a mask designer from Beijing, there was me as a set designer and the lighting designer, there's a separate lighting designer, and a props designer. So there was quite a range of people there. And now the next book project that I'm working on, I'm doing sets and costumes. And I'm a bit like Hugh. I mean, I do like to, call me a megalomaniac, you like to have control over the whole world of it. And when you do work with a costume designer, collaborate with them, it's very particular when you find the person that kind of sees the world similarly to you. That's a precious sort of relationship that generally goes on beyond one production.
Thanks very much.
Cool. Another question. Come on, there's 350 of you in here. Surely somebody else. Oh, that one over here.
Hi, my question is for Brian specifically because I have done a bunch of set designs at Union House Theatre at the University of Melbourne, and I'm also a student architect. So I was wondering how you adapted the skills that you learnt in architecture school to production design.
I think the thing that became very evident for me was that learning about structural matters meant that I could work out how things could be built. There were many times in my early career where a production manager would say to me, oh, you can't do that. And I'd say, well, if you do this, I mean, like that dodecahedron in Jesus Christ Superstar, there was many people who just said it can't be done, it's not possible but to be done. So I went and found a guy who designed aeroplanes. And together we worked out the way of doing it. It wouldn't be, it was all a series of wires and pulleys and things, which it wouldn't be done like that now. And then jumping ahead to the Sydney Olympics closing ceremony, where we needed a globe of the world, and I knew that the solution to that was another dodecahedron. So when I proposed that, I knew, because inherently the structure you just need, knowing the structure, knowing about the platonic solids is kind of really all you need to know about design, I think, because that's how things go together. That's the way that nature puts things together, and that's the way that we can put things together. And I'm always aware of the fact that I need to know how it can be done. In the same way that, you might need to know how to make a costume. I know how to build things. And those endless hours I thought were completely boring in architecture actually turned out to be incredibly important, because I can't be dissuaded from doing something if I know that structurally it can happen. So believe in that.
I noticed you were both kind of nodding and agreeing. Anything that you'd like to...
there are architecture and set design are kind of connected, aren't they? There's a great connection to them, and there is quite a lot of... There are people who've made that jump. It's very kind of logical, I think, yeah.
I get it, but architecture was never my great skill. I came into it more, I suppose, from the tradition of quite an old-fashioned tradition of scenery as painting, sort of painted image. There's a rich history of it, and it like a lot of things, goes in and out of fashion. But again, I had done a fine arts course at university, not thinking I was ever going to be a designer, but just because that was an area of interest. But I think what I found out from that, as Brian drew from architecture, is that you have a way of looking at the world, a way of certainly once you start to analyse certain kinds of paintings, representations of space, for example, that you've learnt more than you know you've learnt. Not that you were setting out to learn that, but that's something that's already there, and maybe that's what it is with architecture. You find you've got a set of base skills that you then find you can apply to this new and exciting job. So there are lots of ways in. I always wish I'd learnt more. I wish I did know how to cut costumes, but you search out the people who are good, and you cling to them.
Yeah, maybe could I just add something to that as well? And then I think that, like, every designer kind of comes to it in a different way, really. And for instance, I was thinking about Tony Tripp. There was an image at the beginning of Tony's image for model for Little Night Music, and his starting point was always 2D. It was always a drawing, Whereas, my starting point is always a model. So maybe there's something about that kind of coming from an architectural... I didn't never train as an architect, but, I think the way you think informs the way you approach the process. And, Tony's was very much coming from an illustrative background. Yeah.
We've got maybe 5 minutes left. I'm going to let this panel run 5 minutes overtime because we started a little bit late. So then we'll have a 15-minute break instead of a 20-minute break. So time for a couple more questions if we have them, please. This gentleman here. The microphone is just coming your way, so...
I've come to this very late in my life, and I'm basically directing. But when I set about directing, I have a very strong vision of how I want it to look. And a couple of years ago, I designed and directed Jesus Christ Superstar in the non-pro area, and it was an award-winning show. But the fatal error I made at the beginning was to be too prescriptive in what I wanted in discussions with the set designer, and nearly lost him. So what would be your advice? What I did was we sat down again and I said, I need some upper galleries. It was a modern adaptation. Upper galleries here, some steps and some doors. So just a brief outline. So what do you find more rewarding? You coming in with no particular brief, where you workshop it with the director, or do you like a firm direction from the director in what his vision is or her vision is?
Well, I personally love to work with directors who have... I'm actually working with Judy Davis at the moment, the actor who's now directing, and she has incredible instincts about how actors, occupy the stage and the things that they need to occupy that stage. And designing with her it's a very kind of organic thing. She sort of knows what she wants, but she doesn't know what that is, if you know what I mean. So in being prescriptive, she said, I want a set where it feels like if you fell off it, you'd fall off the edge of the world. I mean, that's a fantastic brief to be given. And I think that kind of prescriptiveness is good, rather than I need levels and I need this and I need that. I mean, whenever I work with Jim Sharman back in the 70s and stuff, I would just always go through the pop art books and look at, what Andy Warhol might have... I think, what would Andy Warhol do here? Or what would Roy Lichtenstein do here? Or what would, James Rosenquist? And that gave me, apart from anything else, it gave me the kind of things to search for. And now with the wonderful world of Google, you can find anything. And you can just think, I wonder what that particular person, what would Da Vinci have done about that? And it's fantastic to find these. So when Judy gave me these kind of quotes, I said, well, edge of the world, images, what is that? It's... that makes it a wonderful thing to do. But if someone arrives and says, well, I think maybe you need to be careful in terms of asking for the physical bits, ask for the emotional things, and that will lead to the physical things.
Yes, I think the most important conversation you can have with the director is what you both think the thing is about, first up, rather than how is it going to be realised physically? And when you've got a very strong idea yourself, if you're going to engage a designer, leave them at least the sense that there's room to move. Because it's not very interesting to be given I want a door, French's acting edition, a door there and a French windows with a brace. I'm not saying that that's what you were asking for, but clearly you had quite an idea in your mind. Can I ask you, why didn't you design it?
Well, it probably turned out that I really did.
Yeah.
When the set designer and builder went up to collect the award, he came down and gave it to me. But I said, no, please have that, and it's in his house, and I wouldn't dream of accepting the responsibility and the accolades for doing it. But I was sort of acting on the premise of a mentor of mine who has always said, never let the set get in the way of telling the story. So you have to work around that. And the early discussions with him, he was wanting these moving pieces and this coming on and that going off, and I just had to sort of say, no trucks. Not a truck. Park your trucks in the street. The only thing that's moving is the crucifix. And it threw a blanket over his vision of what he thought it ought to be. So, and in regional community theatre, there's not a lot of set designers out there or builders, so you have to work with the resources, the human resources that you have. We worked it out and we had a fabulous collaboration, but it was really a waking up point to me to give ownership of what everybody's doing to that department and step back from it and then let them go off and do their work. But then there's a fine line between throwing an idea in the air that's yours and running away from it and letting somebody else catch it and let them own it. And I think that's the skill that I'm trying to learn, is to put the ideas out there.
I'm just going to jump in at this point and point out that the next panel is all about collaboration. So let's hold it there and explore.
I'll tell you one little funny story about when I did Jesus Christ Superstar. After coming up with this idea for the dodecahedron and thinking that was fantastic and showing it to the producer, to Harry Miller, he said, well, yeah, this is all very well, but he said, what's the big effect in the second act? And I thought, well, Harry, there is the crucifixion.
He's never seen it all. He wasn't a Catholic, perhaps.
Okay, I think we're going to pause it there. We're now going to take a 15-minute break, but before we do, please thank Hugh Colman, Brian Thomson and Richard Roberts. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our next session for Designing for the Stage, in which we're going to talk about the art of collaboration. Now, this is going to be facilitated by Hugh Colman, who some of you may have already been introduced to if you were at our previous session, but if you weren't, Hugh Colman is one of Australia's preeminent theatre, dance and opera designers over the past 5 decades. He's worked on more than 200 productions for companies including Opera Australia, the Australian Ballet, Victoria State Opera and Melbourne Theatre Company. Hugh is known for producing detailed and engaging costume drawings that communicate the personality of each character through gesture and movement. Please make him very welcome. And joining him on stage, Jennifer Irwin has been designing and constructing costumes for dance, drama, opera and film for over 30 years. She's particularly known for her work in the field of dance. She's designed costumes for over 35 Sydney Dance Company productions and has a 25-year association with Bangarra Dance Theatre. In 2004, she designed costumes for Dirty Dancing, which continues to tour, and she joins us on stage. Roger Kirk is one of Australia's leading costume designers. His career spans nearly 40 years and covers drama, opera, musical theatre, dance, film and television. I think we can say he's done it all. His designs include Chicago, The Wizard of Oz, South Pacific, Aspects of Love, Cabaret, The Boy from Oz, Dusty, the original pop diva and King Kong. And I'm just going to note, he has a Tony Award. And our final speaker on this panel, Gabriela Tylesova, has worked across a wide range of projects, designing sets, costumes, concepts and animation for opera, theatre, large-scale events, dance and film. Career highlights include award-winning designs for Andrew Lloyd Webber's Love Never Dies and for Opera Australia's Sweeney Todd and The Rabbits. She's currently redesigning Love Never Dies for Germany and the United States. Please welcome her to the stage.
Now, collaboration is the theme for this next section, and as we will discover, collaboration is kind of the essence of what we all do, and it takes many, many forms. But what I thought I might just do first up to put the put these lovely people at their ease and on a level playing field, because as we discussed in the last thing, sometimes the designer does the sets and the costumes, and sometimes we just do one or the other. And I know that Gabriela, particularly, mostly you do the whole thing, don't you?
That's right.
And Roger, quite a lot you'll do the whole thing. Yeah. But Jenny
Only
absolutely is the costume designer. So what I thought I'd ask each of you to talk about is a collaboration with a fellow designer on a project, whichever one you like to, what that's like, what the collaboration with either the set designer or the costume designer, depending on what project it was. Jenny, I might ask you to start with that. Jenny has worked a great deal with dance design, Bangarra and Sydney Dance Company in particular.
Well, I guess I started my career in 1980 with Sydney Dance Company. Graham Murphy gave me my first job. I learnt on the job and as a maker, and so I made all the costumes for Sydney Dance Company, as well as right at the beginning with Christian Fredrickson as a designer, and then gradually as time progressed, Graham gave me the opportunities to design. So that would have been 1984. So in those days of Sydney Dance Company, it was, you know, contemporary dance was an evolving new thing in Australia, and I've found myself in dance rather than doing drama and opera. That's where I came from. So, and it's what I know best. So, then there's people like Stephen Page and Gideon Oberzanik, and they all came through the young Sydney Dance Company time. So, my career has actually been Graham Murphy and Stephen Page. So, from the washing, ironing, picking up, mending, washing world, so I actually can design a costume that, I mean, I know how it wants to be realised, and then the destruction of it.
Yes, absolutely.
But Graham Murphy, yeah.
Graham Murphy and Gideon. And in terms of the set design, Jenny, the set designer each time, is that a collaboration that's been an important part?
Uniquely, I've been involved with two families, I guess you could say, the Sydney Dance Company and the Bangarra family. So I've actually known them, well, especially Bangarra, for 26 years, and I've been able to work with a family and a company, so I actually know them very well.
Yeah, so it's of the essence. Yes. Roger, could I ask you, collaborating with either another costume designer, or I guess it may be a set designer?
Well, I'm a product of television. I actually started in television and sort of did a lot of the variety shows for ABC. And my first collaboration in theatre was I did Chicago with Brian Thomson, and Richard Werrett was artistic director of the Sydney Theatre Company. I was working with the choreographer who was going to do it, and I said, "Oh, tell Richard I'd like to do that." So Richard knew my work from television, and then he asked Brian to do the set, and he asked me to do it, and that's how I kicked off. And that's how I started in theatre. At the same time, I was still working for the ABC at the time, and double dipping a bit, I suppose you'd say. So my very first collaboration in theatre was with Brian. And I find Brian has a very strong visual presence. So as a costume designer, I waited for him to see what he was going to do before I then came up with ideas that would complement what he was doing. And Brian and I, for a number of years, did a lot of big shows together. And I think probably The King and I was probably one of the best things that we both did as a... And the same applied in that. You know, it was because Brian had a very strong image for The King and I had worked on a film in Bangkok with Brian, Turtle Beach, and I had a Thai crew. And the thing about The King and I was that Brian and the director said they wanted it to be an authentic King and I, not somebody's idea of what Thai was. And so because I'd been working with a whole group of Thai people, when I was offered the job, I rang them up and I said, look, I'm coming up to Thailand, and I bought all the authentic Thai fabrics. I had the people who made the royal Thai dancers masks and headgear and things. It was all original stuff, you know, that I asked them to make for me. And so my theory is, if I'm not doing the whole lot, I usually wait for the set designer to see what they're going to do first, because the set is, you know, is there, and you've got to complement the actors in amongst it. So there's no point me going, oh, I want to do it all purple, and the set designer going, well, I'm sorry, I want to do it purple. It's all, you won't see anybody. So you know, there is a compromise, and sometimes you might have an idea, but the set's going to go this way, and you go, well, I'll move it a bit this way. And in everything you do, I think designing is a real collaboration. I mean, you're only as good, you can do a fabulous drawing, but if you haven't got someone who can make a fabulous costume, you're going to get a dog costume and it's a dud. So, you know, it's like every department you work with, the director, set designer, the lighting designer. I mean, one time I did a show and I did all these costumes in a great colour range, and the lighting designer put green all over it. And I said, hang on, this show is all red, white and blue, you know, don't put green on anything. So, you know, you have to collaborate in every single area. Not a designer can't really stand alone, I don't think. You know, everyone has a little compromise here and there for the other person they're working with.
Yeah. Gabriela, collaborations for you. Set or costume?
I usually, as you mentioned, I usually design both set and costumes. I've done a few times earlier when I finished school that I've done only costumes. And funnily enough, the set designer was my ex-boyfriend. So the collaboration was quite intense sometimes. But, you know, we had our fights and our differences, but then we usually came up with something which worked and which was good. And as Roger mentioned as well, often it was the set would drive, because when I design myself, I start with the set and it's like a sculpture almost, and then that drives really what I come up with the costumes. Or the costumes are in the background as well, the characters, what they're going to look like. But the set comes first for me. Or sometimes, maybe rarely, if there is a really strong response to a character, I sketch the character first, but usually the set. So yeah, there was few, and I think once we worked together as well. That's very rarely. That was probably the only time when I did the set and somebody else did costumes, and I was with you.
Yeah, it was a Noel Coward play for the Melbourne Theatre Company called Blithe Spirit, and I came on board rather late in the production because I think originally it was going to be Tony Tripp, who designed the costumes, and very sadly he died. So the set design already existed, and indeed, as Roger was saying, if you've got a strong set design, it's in your own interest to make your costumes work within that rather than to fight it. And it was a very strong set design.
Too strong.
No, it wasn't
Too
too
strong.
No, it wasn't. No, because, can I say, it moved me into a colour range that I don't normally move into, and it was great to have this. You think, well, yes, I don't want them to vanish against the set. How are we going to kind of meet it? Because the set, in a sense, is the world.
Yes.
And then the performers, whether they're actors or dancers, are the people who live in that world. And most of the time, perhaps the set, the world, comes first. It really depends on where your head is, I think, doesn't it? Mm. But can I just ask you, you designed for Jim Sharman, you designed Così fan tutte with
right.
Ralph Myers as set designer?
That's right, I forgot
So
about
what was that? Was that a collaboration where the set came first? Or did you work together?
No, that was actually, we worked together. We had lots of sessions with Jim, and Jim was influenced by different, the process took like maybe over a year.
Yeah.
And we used to have sessions, and Jim was showing us different productions and different artists he was interested in. So we did with Ralph, I don't know how many versions of Così fan tutte. And so we started both, we were both working together, that's true. Yeah. That wasn't set first, that was together.
Okay.
Mm. We saved a few images, I think, from that production on the slides here.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if I can jump back to Brian and Roger's collaboration on King and I for a moment. Again, one of the things that I remember very much from that is the strength of the colour of the set design, which was, I think, predominantly red. There was am I right in remembering that there was a very strong red with gold. And you working out of that with, again, quite a rich palette, but that was determined to an extent by the fact of the set?
Well,
would you say?
Because I had an association with Thailand,
yes.
They are colourful. I mean, their national dance costumes are very colourful.
Yes.
So if you've got a strong palette, sometimes you've either got to go under or you've got to go up,
Sure.
you know. If you lie in the middle, you get lost in the whatever. But so you know, if you go to a Thai dancing thing in Thailand, their costumes are colourful. And you've only got to go to a temple which is all gold and whatever, and all these coloured costumes out the front. And you go to a Thai silk shop, and there's a wall of colour. There's very few pastels. It's all bright colours. So I guess I just went with, you know, once Brian had started and, you know, was heading down that track, and I had access to all this through Thai people I'd been working with, I just went with my gut feeling of going strong the way it is in Thailand.
Yeah, strong and strong.
And as I said, the brief from the director as well was they wanted it to be an authentic version as opposed to, you know, a Hollywood version of it.
Sure.
And I think it was quite lucky that Brian and I had just done that film up there, and so we'd been exposed to Thai culture quite a bit.
Sure.
You know.
Jenny, can I ask you then, with Bangarra, for example, is there a collaboration there where the set comes first, or does that tend to happen together?
We get together and we sit in a room and we just chat.
Yep.
And we go on and on and on, and
Yes.
and it's everybody together. So it's the whole, you know, the whole process, and we just bounce about ideas, and because unlike a lot of drama, we actually don't have a script
Absolutely.
when it comes to choreography, and so it's trying to actually pin a choreographer down so you can actually figure out sections of how you're going to do it, because there's no point me going away and designing dresses that you can't crawl around on the floor with, so you kind of looking. The set certainly with Bangarra is the first thing, but it's breaking down the groupings, and if there is a story, what direction the story is going to go and how many people, and that, I mean, it's a real practical process of I'm always saying, yeah, but how many are in it, you know?
Yes.
What, give me the numbers
Yeah.
and the practicalities of trying to work out what section goes into what, and the storyline and the protocols, and also working with a company that you work with for years and years and years, trying to reinvent yourself always. I mean, how many kind of skirts can you design for a man, like over 26 years, and it's, you know, and with dance they've got to be able to move first. So there's, you know, it's those kind. I've got to look at different avenues, and also keeping up with it, because you don't have a script, so it's being invented as it's being built.
Yes.
So we're trying to, you know, sew as quick as we can to keep it going, to actually meet the deadline. And with Bangarra, a lot of the time they don't see what they're getting, because you either have drawings or you have costumes. You can't have both.
You can't have both. So it's at dress rehearsal they appear.
Yeah, often.
Yeah. I have to say, Jenny's drawings are absolutely beautiful, and they're on display in our exhibition as well. I mean, if you didn't know what your costume was going to be, you could look at your drawings and have a very good idea of it. Now, Gabriela, you've also worked with Bangarra a couple of times, haven't you? So what was
the only few times when Jenny didn't design it?
Did you do?
I was doing dirty dance.
Jenny was busy.
Oh, we'll come to that. Costume and set?
No, I did only costumes.
Okay, and how was that process there? Was it set first, then costume, or was it?
It was, as Jenny says, it was quite organic and kind of unusual to any other collaboration.
Yeah.
So it was all coming together. I think Peter was designing the set both times, and I can't even remember how it all happened. Maybe we were all working at the same time again, but it wasn't as strict as when you do a drama, if you do a opera or ballet or anything like that.
Sure.
So and Stephen briefed me as Jenny said, you don't really get a specific briefing. It was very much just a feel of more coming and watching the rehearsals, I suppose.
Yeah.
I used to watch quite a bit of rehearsals and then trying things on and seeing how the dancers move in the costumes.
Yeah.
And we set up workroom in the venue, in the rehearsal venue, so we could be, and I'm not a maker, so I can design, but I had people who were making prototypes and we were trying them on. Yeah.
So one of the things that is emerging now is there are two very different ways that designers will come to a production. One is where maybe there's already a script, a classic script, or it might be a musical that already exists, or a ballet. So you have a whole block of information that you don't have when it's being created on the spot, as it were, which is essentially the experience of most contemporary dance, isn't it?
And if you design something for the Australian Opera,
yes,
the designs are done before a step's done.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are different sort of ways in which you have to be flexible as a designer there. I'd like to open up the notion of collaboration and have each of you talk about a collaboration apart from, say, a fellow designer that's been important in the process. I wonder, Roger, if there's somewhere within the whole way that it happens where a particular kind of collaboration's been important for you.
Well, I personally, I think it's different for every job because, you might be working with a director you'd never work with. Sometimes I seem to get a lot of jobs with overseas directors and, they come and you don't know them and, I had one that only gave me Lady Gaga images for a 1920s, show. And so, you've got to get your head around that to start with and work your way through it. But I had a rather unique experience. When I did 42nd Street in New York, I was asked to go over, and Doug Schmidt, an American set designer, designed the set, and he lived in San Francisco. And by the time I got there, he'd moved to New York, and there was an office next to the producers, which they took for this production, and it had 3 rooms. And Doug was in one room, and I was in the next one, and then there was like a room in the middle, which we both sort of shared. And like I hadn't really worked like that since I worked at the ABC, where, you know, you worked, well, if you're assistant, you're in the same office and everything. But Doug was in the next room and I was in the next room drawing, and it was like he'd come in and say, well, what do you think about this number? Have you got any, you know, ideas on that? And you'd go, well, I thought maybe this, and then he'd go, okay, and then I'd be thinking about the dame's number, and I'd go in and say, have you got a backdrop for that yet? And so it was quite unique that we were both in the same office doing the same show, which rarely happens, I think. And the other thing that was quite amazing, because it was such a big cast, it was a cast of over 55, I think, and there were 24 girls and 12 men. So if you were doing the money costume and you do one drawing, because there's 25 of them, I said to my assistant, now, what we're going to do with this show, because no one really gets how big it is, I said, we're going to do 25 photocopies of that drawing and we're going to put them along there. And then underneath it, we're going to put 12 men's tails. And so we finished up filling this whole office, all the walls, with all the costume designs. And every day the producer came in, because they had never been that close to the process. And it was interesting. Half of them had never, all as they'd seen before was at the presentation when it comes. And every day they'd come in, they go, oh my God, there's a lot of costumes. and so it did work, because they knew what they were in for. And but it was amazing to be in the same room designing the same show. Which it's never happened since, you know. You can collaborate and talk a lot, but not to actually be in the same room designing every day. It was quite interesting.
Gabriela, can I ask you then, with something like Love Never Dies, what was one of the major collaborations there for you?
Love Never Dies. Yeah, well, that was a project. We didn't have much time, so it was very much driven by time. And collaboration was strong, certainly with Simon Phillips, the director, but as well with Andrew. I went to see Andrew Lloyd Webber in London, and we had quite a big private session because the production, there was a previous production which didn't really succeed to the expectations. So we were doing like a new take, which was new direction, new design. And Andrew was adding segments of new music as well. And that was quite important, because he really wanted to discuss all the details, what he thought didn't work and did work. So we spent like 3 hours over lots of wine in this beautiful island discussing the show. And it was quite stressful as well, in a way, not stressful at that time, but there was a pressure, because I knew I had to come up with something, you know, as good, at least, you know, or trying to be as good as the original Phantom, which is almost impossible. So, yeah, and, you know, collaboration with Simon Phillips then, I mean, Simon almost left me like carte blanche, like he thought it was sort of one of those shows which really clicked with me, so he let me do it, and he just coming and he came visiting every few weeks and looking how we working on the set and how it's you know, evolving, and I don't know, like the whole house was full of model makers and CAD people drawing the technical drawings. We had a team of like 7 people working on it, non-stop, because we had no time. There was really tight time limit, which was in a way good. Sometimes it's like years for development, and this was like really intense. I can't remember how many months, maybe 3-4 months, when I didn't sleep very much. But, you know, you have only one project in your head and you keep going until you have it, basically.
And you also had an established relationship with Simon by that stage, which must have made a big difference. Definitely,
yeah. We've got quite a unique, I would say, I don't know, I've worked with lots of directors, but I worked a lot with Simon Phillips, maybe for 15 years, over 15 years. And we have sort of like a shorthand that, like, we usually just meet in a cafe and scribble something on a piece of serviette, you know, or not even that. And he gets it, or I get what he wants or what he thinks, and he gets what I kind of, you know, I do some stick figures and he knows what I'm talking about. Whereas I recently worked with a new director and he wanted everything. He wanted all the references, almost like a real images from real life of people in costumes, because he couldn't, the drawings, I mean, I can do quite good drawings, but you know, you don't necessarily need to do a very detailed drawing for the first few sessions, but this was the opposite. So I had to back every idea with lots of visual references. So it was much harder to start. I mean, then later on we developed a way how we worked, but certainly with Simon it's really easy. I find it really easy.
Yeah.
So it's key for me. I think that's one of the things with the collaborations. Like, it's usually you go for, ideally, if you have a choice, you get a team, or you're working with a team or with people you really get on with, and you've got a same sort of language kind of you can speak, which you guys obviously we all know that that's the best scenario. You have actually, even though sometimes it's really stressful, and during production weeks it can be very stressful and time, but you still can have good time and fun and enjoy it as well, and deal with conflicts in a different way. Or you can find how, or the differences, when you come to differences, you can discuss them, so it's not unpleasant, basically. Yeah.
Thank you. Jenny, I was going to ask, as a maker as well, what's it like collaborating with, say, the Australian Ballet Wardrobe, where presumably you're not the maker? Or do you sometimes
but
do,
I usually
do trials?
do sit
do you
down
do?
and,
You can't stop?
sew with them. Because I can't, well, if I'm going to be there, and I mean, it certainly helped knowing exactly how to cut a pattern. And also, if you're a young designer, you can't just rely on design work, because you need to live, like if you've got, the more skills you can have, the better, because you can't just expect to be a designer from the beginning. You need to, there just aren't enough jobs in the world, especially in Australia. So, I mean, you've got to think of other ways of earning money and making a living. I mean, it's a hard living, but I actually enjoy sewing, and I have built Dirty Dancing all around the world. I've built it in New York, I've built it in Toronto and Berlin and London, and it certainly helps as a costume designer to go into a wardrobe department and be able to speak the same language. And know exactly, in fact, I did Giselle in Korea last year with Graham, and nobody could speak any English at all, but we all spoke the same language, because I could just do the odd little scribble and we knew exactly what we were talking about. And if the seam goes here and I want it a bit like this, so it's really helpful.
Fantastic. Roger, can I ask you a little bit about King Kong, which didn't come with anything, I suppose, except the films behind it. It certainly was an original creation as a musical, and it was enormous. What would have been one of the major collaborations there for you?
Well, the worst part about King Kong was that we started 3 years before the thing hit the stage, and there wasn't even a script. And we would have meetings, and you'd come up with ideas, and so then I'd do a few drawings, and we'd have a meeting the next day at 12 o'clock, so I'd take a couple of drawings in, and we'd start to talk. I would be about to take my drawing out of the bag, and whatever we talked about yesterday, they went, "Oh, I'm not doing that now." I mean, the drawings probably would have stood this high on a pile until at the very end I went, "I'm not doing any more drawings," because the director was like pushing the script and actually using you as a sounding board for ideas, but it wasn't going anywhere, So, to get back to the thing itself, the hardest thing for me on that show, like, big doesn't worry me, the bigger they are, I don't care, but there was some new technology, lighting technology, which was like an infrared projection which went onto the puppet, the King Kong puppet, to pick out its contours and do things. But the people who were, which we call the King's Men, who were working the puppet, they didn't, it was this infrared thing, so they didn't want to see the puppeteers when it was being projected. And so we had to test the fabric for whether it would read the image that was projected or it wouldn't. And there was no rhyme or reason. You couldn't say if you get cotton, silk, natural fibres that have been vegetable dyed, then that would work. So we actually had to test like thousands of pieces of fabric to find only 4 pieces in Australia that worked to make these costumes out of which Jenny made some for me. And they were so fabulous we didn't see them because they were on the infrared light. So that was really difficult. And sometimes like it's interesting working with those new technologies, but sometimes getting there with them is quite hard,
Yes, I do. Gabriela, can I ask you about Sleeping Beauty?
Yes.
Another major production. It's probably the biggest classical ballet in the repertoire. And can I ask you specifically if the music was part of the collaboration that was important to you in a sense?
Oh, definitely. And Tchaikovsky's fantastic score. I mean, we did, Nicolette Fryan, we had sessions with the conductor, Nicolette, and David McAllister, the choreographer, and he's the artistic director of Australian Ballet. And they actually, because the original production is about 3 or over 3, or I think it's almost 4 hours long. So nowadays, when Sleeping Beauty is done anywhere in the world, it's usually Tchaikovsky's score is chopped up by half almost. So, and they were just working out which sections they will keep, which section they will get rid of or lose, and how they connect the music and all of that. So we were listening because the transitions from scene to scene with the music are really important as well, and how you deal with that with the costuming, or how the costumes work, and how the whole set works. So it's driven, like with opera as well, it's driven by music. So yes, it was. It was a beautiful experience, actually. It was my first, like, a big ballet, and I've fallen in love with ballet, which I never thought I would.
How not?
Yeah.
What about music with Bangarra, Jenny? Where does that come in the scheme of things? Is that ever a source of collaboration for you, or is it nearly always original and therefore coming late in the piece?
It's always come very late in the piece.
Yeah.
But that's quite hard at the moment because we lost David.
Absolutely.
So Bangarra will be... Things will change a bit over the next couple of years with the music, but no, the music's never been on with the Bangarra evolution.
Yes.
No, the music's always come a bit later.
Yes, but say with Sydney Dance Company, a mix of new and old.
I don't think the music's ever had. No, I don't think it has.
It's never been one of
your inspirations? No, it's more set-driven for me.
Okay.
Set and actually fabric-driven is the way I design, because it's generally a contemporary work. I try and find fabrics that will inspire me, or invent fabrics, or print fabrics, and because I can do pattern making, I can print fabrics in the shapes to get them printed out. So with Bangarra, I always find fabrics that I can add ochre to, because they become their own artworks down the track. And what begins on opening night, and certainly 6 months down the track after touring, and ochre every night, and it's like this. I try and provide maybe a texture that we can build on and can transform and go in another direction. So I guess a lot of my designs are fabric driven.
Yes. Interestingly, Sandy Powell, film costume designer, gave a talk just recently and said very much the same thing, that was her starting point as often as anything would be with the fabric, and that she would produce her designs after she'd made the costume, so the designs always looked like the costume. So There's a good hint.
I just don't do the drawing.
Roger, music, is that would you say that's one of your collaborative inspirations?
Well, I mean, I do a lot of musicals,
You do?
and I've done a bit of ballet as well. And so, opera, it's all music driven, operas, the music gives you the feel of everything as soon as you hear it. So it's very important. Same with musicals. I mean, you've got to listen to the music, know if they're dance numbers, the costumes, dancing is a whole different ball game, ballet, musical, theatre, as opposed to just a play where they don't have to really do too much.
Sure.
So I'd just like to say one little thing that probably a lot of people don't know. Gabriela's had fabulous success with Love Never Dies, and Brian Thomson did the original Jesus Christ Superstar in London, and I've worked in London on Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals, and I think it's quite interesting that an international player like Andrew Lloyd Webber has actually used Australian talent quite a bit. And I don't think a lot of people know that. I worked with Gail Edwards on 2 productions, one in New York and one in London, and Brian's done a couple of things as well as Superstar, haven't you? Yeah. So it's sort of interesting that, he does put his faith in Australian directors and designers,
Yes. Well, for a very good reason. And Jenny, your costumes for Dirty Dancing, which...
I did sell my soul.
Can you tell us a little about the various collaborations that were involved there?
I guess that's probably not a collaboration, because that opened in 2004 in Australia as a very small little entity, and then was sold on and has been... I am the last Australian standing in that show. I've seen probably 6 directors. I've seen about 4 or 5 set designers. I've seen multiple producers. They've come and gone, and actually, in that design creative process is unlike anything I've ever done in my whole life, and anyone is ever likely to do, is because it's owned by the woman that wrote the movie, and it's her story, and so it took me a long time at the very beginning to work out that I wasn't actually working for the producer, I wasn't working for the director, I was actually working for the woman that owned the show, and I worked it out, and I've put every conceivable colour of costume on the stage, and now we've done down the track that it actually can't be reinvented now, because we've given her everything,
yes.
and she's happy with where it sits, and but that's that's a musical unlike anything else.
So was she driving those changes, essentially?
She's driven every single change all the way along with absolutely everything.
Right. Scary. Roger, can I ask you? Can I ask you, with something like The King and I, which I assume the rights to that are owned by somewhere Rogers and Hammerstein come into it, do they prescribe anything that you do on a show like that? Are they non-existent collaborators?
No, because when we did King and I it happened quite funny, like Brian met the director, and I think somebody else was going to do it, and then Brian started work on it, and then I got a phone call, would I go and meet the director, and that all happened so quick. And in fact, I only had one meeting with the director where I had actually got pieces of paper and done, like you say, stick drawings in market scene, this sort of person. There were pages of these people in each scene, just rough. Do we want a snake man here? Do we want this there, or whatever? And it happened so quickly. And then a lot of it, I was stood in a market in Thailand, and I went, okay, I'll have gold, yellow, orange, pink, a colour range. I just took, 25 packets of fabric and, things that went with them. So that sort of happened, very, very differently. But I was conscious of when I went to New York to make sure I changed, like the leading ladies' costumes were based on the film when we did it here. But when I went to New York, I went, well, I don't want to get sued or anything. Yeah. So I just totally, I did ask the Hammerstein Foundation, and they said no, they didn't think there was anything wrong with what I'd done, even though some of it was inspired by the movie. But I did change everything, and so that there could be no going, oh, well, that's just a copy of the movie or whatever. Sure. But the Hammerstein Foundation didn't really put any things on it. Should I tell the story about on The King and I? When we did it in Adelaide, and the Hammerstein Foundation do have it in their contract that the producers have to pay for somebody to come and see the show. And so we did it in Adelaide, and they sent out the office boy, wasn't it? So there's somebody in the office in the Hammerstein Foundation said, anybody want to go to Australia? There's a production, there's a free trip. So they said to this young guy, go. And Brian and I met him. I think we took him out to dinner, didn't he? Anyway, he said, I saw it, and I got on the phone. He said, somebody needs to come and look at this that knows what it's all about. He said, because I've never seen anything like it, And so then Ted Chapin, who ran the foundation, and Mary Rogers came out. And it was Mary Rogers, when she saw it, said that she thought it should go to New York, and she was the one that made it get there. So, yeah. But that was quite a funny story.
Gabriela, collaborations within the people who actually make our work for us.
Yes.
Tell me some important collaborations there for you, because you have
Certainly
a very particular style.
I do, yeah. And drive the departments crazy. No, I don't. Well, we've for example, recently, as you mentioned, Sleeping Beauty, massive ballet, which took over a year to produce. Fantastic collaboration with the costume department here in Melbourne, which was a massive effort. And like, for example, Musette, who is the head ladies caterer, she was really embracing the project. And she worked with me till late at night, making new prototypes, and we were kind of rediscovering ways how to make tutu. Like, we've done a new way of constructing tutu, basically, which was on big part her effort. Like, she followed the drawings, and my costume drawings were quite unusual in a way how I drew the tutu, and she thought she would try and recreate that. And she succeeded, and she was more excited than myself because, it comes from a technical background. She does come from a technical background, and it's quite a tricky thing what she achieved to do. So that when you get somebody like that on a show, it's a massive, bonus, because they basically make your drawings or your work 10 times better, and that's what you always hope for. With any, if it's a prop maker, like if you get a fantastic prop maker, set builder, scenic artist. I've got a great scenic artist or a great relationship with a Russell Carey from Sydney, from Scenographic Studios, and I usually go straight to him if I've got a big cloth to paint, for example, and because we've got again, like, I totally trust what he does, and he does it really well. He does it better than what I give him, basically. So it's key. As Roger said before, you can have a fabulous costume drawings, but if it goes through the wrong hands, you can lose it completely. Yeah. But it is as well, it's important, your relationship with the makers, it's really important, and how you communicate and how you almost seduce them to work or to give you the best job. Yeah. So yeah, I usually, and milliners, the same with milliners. Like, we had about 4 or 5 milliners making fantastic hats, and I usually find, like, when people are great, there's no much, you just let them do their work. So almost the drawing is a guide, but then they go and they take it somewhere else. And if they're fantastic, they usually, they surprise you, they bring some fantastic pieces.
Sure.
So that was the case. So I was lucky. There were a few problems. It was not everything was, you know, like a rosy road, which never is on any production. But I was lucky with quite big number of collaborators were great, and they were into it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Jenny, being the hands-on maker that you are, is it hard to let that side of it go to other people?
Yeah.
Yep.
However, in the year 2000, when I was lucky enough to design one section of the Olympics opening ceremony and all of closing with Michael Wilkinson,
that was fantastic.
And Brian, who, you know, and we had so many costumes, and we had the biggest, most fantastic wardrobe department all in one spot. And everybody that had ever worked in any film and anything in the whole of Australia all working together under one roof. And we had no limitations, and it was remarkable.
Like
It was remarkable, and the supervisors and everybody being able to work together and deliver 2,000 pairs of shoes the same colour, and you know, like it was. And strangely, the bigger the project, the easier it becomes in a strange way, because you've got so many more people to support you, and so many more possibilities.
So management, is that a collaboration in that sense? I mean, within the organisation
certainly
of the wardrobe,
supervisors
you have a supervisor.
and really, if you've got somebody good that's running the thing, it takes so much stress off you, and they are. Every job is stressful.
Sure.
Every little show and every big show, it's always stressful.
Roger, can I ask you what the difference was working on Boy from Oz when it was taken to the Hugh Jackman Boy from Oz? Because I think originally you designed the whole production, is that right?
No, I only did the costumes on the original production as well. So.
But that's what I mean, is didn't you design the whole of the original production? Set-down costumes?
No, just the costumes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you have to adapt or did you choose to adapt when it was done for Hugh Jackman?
Well, it was different because it was an arena, you know, and an arena, like, you've got to be big and bold, you know, sort of like doing a Las Vegas show, I suppose. I mean, that's what most people said that saw it and said to me afterwards, oh my God, we haven't seen anything like that for years, because it was like a Las Vegas show. So the approach was different. It was like you just do block colour, bold, bang, you know, because you've got 50 people on stage, and you know it's about a big splash, you know.
Yeah.
So.
But you had a change of director as well for that, didn't you? Because the
did.
Original was Gail Edwards.
Yes, Gail did the original stage show, and then Brian and I did the Hughes Arena show, and that was with Kenny Ortega, who was he choreographed the original Dirty Dancing, but he had done all those, you know, Mariah Carey, Las Vegas, he was working on the Michael Jackson show when he died, and, you know, so he, but I have to say, he sort of let us go a bit, didn't he, you know, in the end, and I suppose, you know, like, we're talking about collaboration. I did Hugh's show last year. Brian and I did Hugh's show last year. And I was on holidays in Europe, and I got a phone call, you know. So I had to go to New York to sort it out. And, it's not much, you know, it's Hugh he's got a few dancers and blah, blah, blah. I get there, you know, they've got 10 girls and, you know, 8 boys or whatever, 10 boys, and it was huge. They were in every number, and I'm going, oh my God, you know. And so I couldn't tell it all sort of, we knew exactly what we were doing. I didn't really then know how big it was. But I got on the phone because I work with a supervisor and makers that I won't move without, because you do, the collaboration within your department, they're going to deliver the goods, and they do a great job. And in my case, we all get on well together. There's no drama. Nobody's fighting with anybody. We all have a good laugh and get it on, and that's very important to me, anyway. Yeah. And so I start ringing home, going, can you do this thing? Oh no, I'm doing the X Factor. Oh no, I've just said I'll do some other show, Sound of Music. And not one of my crew that I normally use could do it. Well, I went into a panic because what am I going to do? Anyway, I got home, and luckily they all left their jobs to come and do mine. And so I was very lucky that I got my whole team back. But, I guess, if you're good to the people you work with too, then they will do that sort of thing for you. And I really did appreciate it. And it was a huge show. We did the whole thing in 6 weeks or something, and we had a good laugh and had a great time doing it, even though it was hard work.
Hard work.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not quite sure how we're going for time. Question time would be good. Okay. There are so many other collaborations we haven't touched on, particularly the ones with the performers, but we'll just leave that up in the air, and maybe you could ask some questions about that.
If we have any questions, starting with the gentleman down the front here, please, and if you could wait until the microphone comes to you.
Hi, Jenny, it's Brian. Can you tell us the story about the Cathy Freeman, the outfit that she, when she lit the cauldron, what happened to that?
Well, I did the costume for Cathy Freeman's torch lighting, and I made it because I could, and also I did it on the night beforehand, and well, they didn't tell me who it was going to be. So anyway, I did it quite hastily, and I actually sewed the Olympic rings upside down, but I didn't even think about it, and actually nobody picked it up except for the Telegraph. But and then it was stolen. So it was stolen, and then 10 years later, it turned up in Melbourne actually, and was sent up to Sydney for identification, and so then suddenly it became a news story. So I had to go to Auburn Police Station and identify it. So I took my dog, and she came. So I have pictures of my old rescue sitting there, looking at the rings, and sure enough, it was it. And that is one way I could identify it, because they were upside down.
That's fantastic.
Other questions from the floor? Maybe over here on the back on the left. We've got a couple of questions there, I think.
Hi. I just wanted to know who have been your favourite people to collaborate with that you haven't been able to yet? Like people you want to collaborate with but you haven't been able to yet.
That's a bit of a hard one, because I think, in this business you don't think like that. It's like you get offered a job, and you either get offered to do the whole thing, or in my case I might only get offered to do costumes, and I'm more likely to say no, I won't do that because I don't want to work with that person.
I suppose it's more companies that, for me, I'd like to, I wouldn't mind doing one for the Royal Ballet. I wouldn't mind doing, it'd be more companies that you'd want to work with because of the companies that, the skill that they have, and wouldn't mind doing a James Bond movie.
About me, probably one person it's Barikowski. I was still at school when he was around here, and we got on really well, and he's got a similar aesthetic to mine, but then he moved to Germany, so That's probably somebody I would think of, I would like to work or do a project with him. But I already know him and I know kind of how he is. Yeah. But yeah, us, we saying, or working for one of those companies like Royal Ballet would be great.
There was another question up the back as well.
I just want to ask, what made you decide to do costume design? Or was there a moment in your life that you thought, like, I want to do costume design over commercial design or another part of design, another area of design?
Well,
that's a question for Jenny.
I'll go first because
in general.
I was, as I said, I was a product of television, and in TV, I was doing all the variety shows like the Marsha Hines shows and Farnham and Byrne and all that, and I did both. And it wasn't until I started working in theatre with Brian for a few years there, we did a lot of stuff together. And so people only knew me as a costume designer, even though I did both. And in fact, the first set I did for theatre was because something happened and Brian couldn't do the job. And we were supposed to be doing this play together. And Brian had to pull out because I think he got a film or something. And so they asked me to do the set. And so that was like how I first did the set in theatre. So I'm known more as a costume designer, but only because that's how I started in theatre, only doing costumes.
Other questions? Maybe second row from the back.
When you're collaborating with the actors, do you ever have to scrap any of your designs because you haven't discussed with them early enough what they believe they see as the character and that they don't really relate to what you're designing?
Jenny, go.
Yeah. Well, that's what I do love about dancers. They'll wear anything and they'll do what they're told. But no.
That's because you never put men in white tights.
That's right. Part of the costume designer, it really is trying to tell an actor that yes, they do look good. You know, when they say, "Do you think I look good in this?" and you think, "Well, we've made it for you." Like, of course. So it is a real trying to tell them how, prop them up and
Go on, you have a go.
I had a terrible experience. We were doing 50th anniversary Melbourne Theatre Company was The Visit, Dirama play, and Zoe Caldwell was playing the lead. She flew from New York and she was the star. She was quite an old lady by then. And the designs were done because I worked with Simon. Simon Phillips was the director. We worked on the concept and everything prior to Zoe's arrival, and I had the drawings ready and I was showing her. Simon was sitting next to me and she looked at them. She said, "Terrible, I will never wear that." And I was... And we both looked at each other with Simon, just going, "Oh my God, where do we go from there?" And I suppose we left Zoe be. They went through the rehearsal process, and slowly she realized, she actually then saw the model, and she realized that it was quite stylized production. And at the end, funnily enough, she wore exactly what I drew. I didn't redraw the drawing or the costume drawings. We ended up doing exactly what was originally planned, and she was loving it. But there was a quite strong start, strong from to the end. That was probably the strongest, I think, that somebody told me, "No way, this is absolutely terrible. I'm not wearing it." Yeah.
We had another question, I think, about 2 or 3 along from our last questioner, and then second row from the front.
Hello. Last talk there was mention of making sure that everything in a piece had meaning, everything had intention, everything had an idea behind it. When you're collaborating with people that you don't necessarily know very well, do you find it difficult to open up and find ways to find that meaning with someone you're not necessarily too close to?
Yeah, it's really hard.
Well, that can happen with an actor, sometimes, opera is a funny example because, you've designed a show and somebody's flying in, And I remember saying to Yvonne Kenny once, who I admired and did quite a few things with, and so, you know, I showed her the costumes before I even presented them. And but most times you don't have that, you know. The staff flies in for the first day of rehearsal and half the costumes are made. And I said to her, you know, it must be difficult in Europe where they do some of these off-the-wall productions where they want you half naked and, you know, rolling in blood and everything. And I said, you know, you must walk into a few doozies. And she said, no, you get to learn to know what directors do what style of production. And so if you know the style of the director, then you say no. So, you know, because that is difficult. I mean, you know, if years ago when I worked a lot at the Sydney Theatre Company, you know, we were working with Jackie Weaver and Robin Nevin and everybody, you always had a chat to them before you presented the thing with the director and everything, where, you know, like even in film, sometimes you don't get the chance. You just, it's designing, it's all happening, and they arrive and off you go, you know. So sometimes they've got to get on the wavelength that you're on. And I've had a couple of funny experiences, and one person didn't want to wear it, you know, and I said, well, this is the concept of the show, and, you know, we need to talk to the director about it, you know. I'm happy to change it, but that's the way we've all gone down the track now. I mean, I always say about being a costume designer is that you need to be 95% a diplomat and 10% a designer. Because, like, sitting down doing the drawings is the easiest part of the job. It's getting it made the way you want it, getting the actor on side and, you know, keeping them happy. Because in the end, you're actually only helping them to do their job too. You know, it's not just about the costume, it's not like fashion where you just make something and hang it on a rack. You're actually creating a character, and you need the actor to come on the same journey as you are to make that character. And as a designer, your job is to help the actor do that. And if you can't find the common ground to come together to make all that happen, then, you know, then it is a disaster, you know. So that's what I say. You're more 95% diplomat, 10% designer.
I think we have time for one last quick question, second row from the front here. And while that microphone is coming to you, after this we'll break for lunch and reconvene at 1:40.
In the PowerPoint, they show some very detailed and very beautiful designs for the costumes and the set. Would they be, such as the one up now, but would that be how many times would you go over the costumes or the set, and how many times would you like tear pieces up just because you can't deal with what you're doing and just can't handle redoing them over and over again?
Well, I'm going to speak on this one because I'm not an artist and I hate making models. There's a photo of my Sweeney Todd which I made the model myself because it was a job I didn't have enough money to employ an assistant. So the model is appalling. And I'm not an artist like these two fabulous women whose work is absolutely amazing. I mean, I'm on the photocopier and the Texticolor's colouring in. And if I can't do it in 5 minutes flat, out of here, you know. But you girls have amazing skills. They're pieces of art, really, you know. And I admire that. I'm sorry I don't have that skill.
But you've got a Tony.
Well, I think that's more luck than good management. So.
Nothing to add, I think.
In that case, we might wrap up. Please thank Hugh Colman, Jennifer Irwin, Roger Kirk and Gabriela Tylesova.